Australia has a worse work-life balance than the US, according to an OECD survey. And on average, workers put in 4 hours and 20 minutes of unpaid overtime per week. That leads to 6 weeks of unpaid overtime a year. Eliza Littleton is senior economist at the Australia Institute Centre for Future Work, and she joins us now from Canberra. Good afternoon, Eliza. So Australia has a reputation, don't we, for being relaxed at work and at play. That's not the case, it seems.
No, I mean, I think we like to tell ourselves that we're very relaxed and that we're laid back and we don't work too hard, but that's definitely not the case. Our research shows that unpaid overtime is a persistent and widespread issue in our workforce. We found that workers on average are doing 4 hours and 20 minutes of unpaid overtime every week, which results over the whole year in 6 weeks of unpaid overtime, and because of this, workers are losing $8,000 a year in unpaid wages as well. And this is not an exceptional thing. It happens across all industries, occupations and types of workers. So costing workers billions, and yeah, workers are giving away their work for free.
So overtime means not just staying longer at the office or workplace, it involves doing any sort of work outside the hours that have been agreed with your employer.
Yeah, so unpaid overtime was not just, in this case, measured as something people are doing at work. Of course, coming in early, staying late in the office contributes to this unpaid overtime issue. But technology has a really big role to play in contributing to unpaid overtime in Australia. People taking calls on holidays, on the weekends, at home. I think this is something we can all relate to, checking emails, responding to them as well. So we're just really contactable at all hours of the day because of the use of technology in our working lives.
And how has COVID and working from home affected things, Eliza?
Certainly over COVID and the pandemic, we saw an increase in unpaid overtime. We've been running this survey, which is called Go Home on Time Day, since 2009. And we found that there was a spike in unpaid overtime during COVID. I think, obviously there were a lot of people who weren't working, but those who could work and weren't essential workers were working at home. And I think we saw a really big kind of blurring of work and life. Outside of life because of the way that we were integrating work into our lives then, and it meant that people were reporting and doing a lot more unpaid overtime during that period.
So what's the reason then for these hours now of unpaid overtime? Is it because of hangover from COVID, worker shortages, or are workloads just simply too heavy?
It's all of those reasons. Our research found that some of the main reasons that people are doing so much unpaid overtime are not because individual workers are choosing to do this unpaid overtime. It's actually because of a lot of external kind of workplace forces that are contributing to it. So the things that you've mentioned are actually some of the top reasons, like workload issues, staff shortages due to illnesses, and also the expectations of managers and workplace culture. So it tells us that it's a systemic problem, and it tells us that the solutions need to be rooted in our industrial relations laws.
That sounds as if it's going to take a long time to change, Eliza.
Potentially, but there's been a lot of movement and headway on these issues. We've seen, particularly from our own Parliament and the Senate Select Committee into Work and Care, recommending a right to disconnect, a 4-day work and a 4-day work week. These are things that our research has also shown could help improve work-life balance. And we've also shown that there's a lot of support amongst Australian workers, particularly for a right to disconnect. We found that 84% of workers would like to see a right to disconnect implemented by our government in our national employment standards.
From an individual point of view then, what can workers do if they are feeling the pressure of too much work? Couldn't unions help, or what's the reception they're likely to get if they approach their boss themselves?
I think this is definitely something that workers should be banding together and doing with their collective power, particularly through a union or an enterprise bargaining agreement. We all know that there's a power dynamic in our workplaces that make it really hard for individual workers to ask for better conditions, to ask for better pay. But when workers work together and through a union. We know that, and history has showed us that unions have played a really big and important role in improving working conditions for workers. So, for example, the right to disconnect, that was won by a couple of different unions, the Victorian Police, EBA in 2019 won a right to disconnect, the Queensland Teachers Union last year won a right to disconnect. So history shows us that unions are a really good avenue for fighting for workers' rights and a way we can succeed and win these things.
Eliza Littleton, thank you.
No worries.